Oh, hi! This week, since it's fresh in my mind and I want to keep troubleshooting this pattern that I made, I took another attempt at the A-line skirt. Now, the issues I had first time around was mostly with the buttons and the fabric itself, and that's why it didn't end up in my wardrobe. So this week, I thought I would try to tackle some denim because I'm afraid of it, so it feels like the thing to go for, because that's just been the trend so far this year, is tackling projects that scare me. And I'm sure I've done some amount of sewing on denim, but never a whole project like this. And I was recently given so much of it. So my best friend's mom used to work at the Gap, and this must have been some kind of display thing. One section has these giant numbers that say 1969 on it, which I assume is one of the collections they had, or maybe that's when the Gap started, I don't know. And there are some cuts and a couple spots on the fabric, so I'm going to work around that. And you know me, all the scraps are going to get used for something. So I jumped right into it and I took the A-line pattern that I made last week. Now I do plan to make a circle skirt A-line because the image I have in my head still has not been met. But since I've been dealing with this specific pattern and I haven't quite perfected it yet, I'd really like to give it another go. And honestly, the day I cut all this stuff out, which was yesterday, I probably shouldn't have been using sharp implements. I say this because I cut my own finger open. I won't actually show you, just in case that stuff ekes you out. But I did it with my own nail, and then within the same minute, I cut my lip with cardboard box because I was trying to take out the recycling. Then I guess before that, I went to take a sip of coffee and cracked myself in the tooth with the mug, which it's probably been years since I've done that to myself. And then there's an extension cord that was hanging, and the big chunky end of it where you actually put the plugs in, I managed to crack myself in the head with that. Again, moving cardboard boxes, it hit it and it swung back and clocked me in the head. So just not great as far as proprioception goes. And all before I even finished my first cup of coffee. Just, why am I like this? Okay, back to actually cutting out the fabric. I did omit any interfacing just because the denim is really heavy duty and I don't think it needs any extra support. Though I was pleasantly surprised to find that this ironed out beautifully. I guess it's like a natural cotton fabric, so it makes sense now that I'm saying it out loud. But at the time I was like, oh wow, this is beautiful. So once all my pieces were cut, which was the waistband piece, the 2 front panels, and then the 1 back piece that had been cut on fold. If you want any specifics about how I drafted this pattern, I will put a little card to the video I did last week, or 2 weeks ago. What year is it? Because I go into depth as far as taking my measurements and where I marked all that out on the pattern. I do think I need to take a little bit out of the waistband. It's funny the difference a week makes because I was supremely bloated last week, and now the waistband measurement I took, I should have remeasured. I did it to myself, but I used the same pattern which had measurements from before. Recent, but still before, and now it's a little bit too big on me. But I fluctuate between those sizes, so it's gonna be fine. It'll get worn. As I mentioned, this is pretty heavy duty fabric, so I want all of the side seams to be pressed open. I did serge the side seams on the 3 skirt pieces, and then 1 long side of the waistband, and the 2 short ends. I do end up cutting these down later on. We'll get there when we get there, but I guess it's not super necessary to serge the short ends with how I'm folding the waistband down. Then I stitched the side seams together, laid the back panel down, right side up, and then lined up the side seams of both front panels, so it was like a little sandwich. And then did a straight stitch at a 2.5 setting on my machine, just straight down each side. And as I said, press those seams open so they're laying nice and flat. I'm just trying to reduce as much bulk as I can because the bottom of this is gonna get hemmed, so I only want 4 layers of fabric to sew over instead of, if the seams were pushed to one side, that would have it tripled up on one side, meaning there'd be 6 layers to sew through, and I just don't want to have to put my machine through that. Also, a thing I do if I'm having a hard time getting a nice crisp seam press is I will lay the fabric right side up. This does sometimes cause iron shine, especially if it's a wool. Seems to happen most on wool for me, but the denim could take it. Once I've pressed the seam on the underside, just so I know everything's laying the direction I need it to go, I have the iron in one hand. I kind of hip check the ironing board and put my weight on one side, and then I pull with the non-ironing hand against my own weight. So I'm kind of pulling both directions while I'm pressing it, and that really seems to get the seam to lay super nice and flat. So then I measured at the short ends of the waistband 1.5 inches in, because if you remember from the pattern I made, I set the placket at 1.5 inches. So that's how much I'm folding this in. Just so you're not like, what are these numbers you're pulling out of thin air? I decided to have 1.5 inch wide placket. I also pressed the waistband in half the long way because that's going to end up getting folded over and it just makes it easier if I do it ahead of time. Oh wait, and then on the waistband, so when I folded that 1.5 inches over, I realized, like I did with the side seams, accounting what the hem was going to have to turn into if I didn't do it a certain way, I thought ahead for once and realized the button placket at the very top, if I fold the waistband over with that full 1.5 inches width, I'm gonna have 4 layers to do a buttonhole through, and my machine had a hard time with the wool doing that. I didn't trust it to make it through that many layers of denim nicely. So I trimmed that down and only left about 1/4 inch to fold over, enough that I can catch it with my sewing machine from the top side, but not enough it's gonna interfere with any buttons or buttonholes. Then I also folded in 1.5 inches on the straight center front edges of the skirt, gave that a nice press. Then once all the skirt panels were together and everything was pressed open, I did go over that entire bottom edge with the serger. Then it was time to attach the waistband to the top of the skirt. I'm forever forgetting to mark the center point of these things. Also, every time I say the word center point, I just hear in my head, every time she marks a point, I mark a center point. Ska kids never say die. So anyway, I marked the center point of the waistband and the center point of the back panel of the skirt. It did take a little bit of finessing to attach this because there's a slight angle between the center back panels and the front panels where they attach, but I just took my time and made sure I was lining everything up. This is where it comes into play that we're turning a 2-dimensional thing, like a bolt of fabric, into something 3-dimensional that's going to fit around our bodies, and our bodies have a lot of curves to account for. So this is kind of the magical part of a sewing project for me, is when I kind of have to finesse it because there's shapes to go around. It can also be wildly frustrating doing this part, but for me, the most satisfying. And since I cut the waistbands down a bit, I did still line up the fold edges, but obviously the waistband wasn't going all the way to the very end of the skirt panel because we trimmed that down. Then same thing, I stitched along that edge. I do go in as far over as my needle will let me on my machine when I attach the front waistband seam like this, where normally I just have it like at the normal center point. Not gonna do it again. That just gives me a little more wiggle room when I do the stitch in the ditch from the top side. Then I press that seam up into the waistband, and because, especially being a wider seam that I did here, I wanted to trim it down at the ends where the placket's gonna be. Same thing, just accounting for how much bulk is gonna be there when I add the buttons and buttonholes. So it's fine for the rest of it, I don't care about that. It kind of adds a little bit of structure to it, but I don't want that bulk at the ends. Then it was time to fold up the waistband. So I folded the small edge over and then folded the waistband down. And same thing, I took my time lining up this edge and making sure it was the right shape as I went along. And then I did a stitch in the ditch from the top side where you go right along that seam. You try to get your needle as hidden in that little groove as you can. And it's very effective at hiding your stitches. Like if you're not looking for it, you're not gonna see it. And that's also a very fun part about sewing. Then I did a quick hem. I just folded it up once. I also decided, because I didn't like how the placket came out on my last skirt, to do some top stitching both at the very edge of the placket and where the folded edge ends underneath. So then I get these 2 parallel rows of top stitching on the placket. Then I did a little fit check just to make sure I didn't totally fuck up everything so far. I did mark where I wanted the lowest button to go because that was something I didn't do last time and caused the most issues for me, I think. And also, a great thing that Anna pointed out on that red skirt I made is she was asking why the buttonholes were going the direction they were going, and you know, they shouldn't have been going that way. The top button, for me, it makes the most sense on a waistband for that to be going horizontal, but going down the placket, I don't know why I did them horizontally on that other skirt. I just didn't think about it. So I did do these ones vertically, which I think is a lot better and maybe helps with the gapping issue I was having last time. Also, I did use more buttons. Before I even got into any of the measuring or figuring out what button I was even going to use for this project, I did go to sleep because I didn't want to tackle this at the end of the day when I was like hungry for dinner. Which brings us to today, where I fiddled with this first set that were bigger buttons and there were only 5, and I was afraid that was going to cause the same issues. I did safety pin in a couple spots to kind of check the spacing, and I didn't like it, so I needed to find a set of just more buttons. So I tried a couple things out, and then I settled on these 3/4 inch diameter, shiny, kind of purpley bluey buttons. They just look really dark when you don't have direct light on them. So I used my fancy springy tool here and measured out as many buttonholes as I had buttons for. I did keep one extra. I was thinking of adding a like decorative button to the very bottom, so that's why I was like fiddling around past the pinpoint. I wanted the skirt buttonholes to end at the pin, but was going to add one more after that. And then I just decided to omit that whole thing. So for my machine, the buttonhole foot, you just put the size button you're using in the back end, and that tells the button foot how long to make the buttonhole. It's brilliant. I get excited about it every time. Simple, but effective technology. And this is how my machine does it. I just line up the bottom of the buttonhole. I kind of draw out this line and then have the two ends so I know where I want it to stop and start. So I line up the bottom centered under the needle, and then it does a wide set of zigzags, almost like a bar tack, and then does a narrow row up one side, bar tack at the back, and then comes back towards you to finish off the other end. Super straightforward. I promise it's not that scary with an automatic buttonhole foot. You just gotta make sure your machine settings are whatever your manual tells you. I have 2 dials I have to switch. You can't see that. I have 2 dials I have to switch. Here and here, there's a little buttonhole indicator mark on them. And then I usually have this set to the widest stitch width. And then there's this little toggle guy that comes down and helps put pressure on the foot so it can spring back towards you. And by spring back, I mean your machine is stitching 2 different directions, which it usually doesn't do. So that's what that does, is it helps bring it back, or go backwards in the first place actually, then it comes towards you. Then I just use my seam ripper to open up the buttonholes. I always start at the bar tack ends and push towards the center of the buttonhole, and then I go from the other side and push back towards it because I don't want to risk slicing through any of the bar tack stitches at the end, or else you are fucked. I mean, you can hand stitch it back down and like try to finagle it, but it never looks as nice when I've tried to like redo a part of a buttonhole once I've started cutting it. Then I laid my skirt back on my ironing board and I put the untouched placket side underneath buttonholes I just made, pinned it in place, made sure everything lined up really nicely, and then I marked the center of each of those buttonholes and made little X's basically so I knew where all the buttons were gonna go. I made sure they were centered in the placket, like between those 2 rows of stitches, and all at the same height as the buttonholes. And why I say this is the biggest factor in the gapping issue that I had with the first skirt is because all the buttonholes on that red skirt were going this way. So when the button was in it, there was no wiggle room up or down. So if there was any movement happening, of course it was going to pucker out. We're having the buttonholes going this way when the button's in it. It has a little bit of give if it's going to shift up and down, which gives the fabric somewhere to go. This is at least my theory about it, and it seems to have worked, but I also used more buttons so there were smaller gaps between them anyway. Oh, also, it was when I was marking out where the buttons were going to go that I realized I missed a row of the top stitching on the placket, so I did go and fix that, and then came back and lined up all the buttons one by one in my machine. To sew a button on my machine, you just take all the feet off. There's not a special foot for it. The little like leg comes down, sets in it. It's kind of a pain if you have a button like this with a raised outer edge and a small like indent in the middle, because it wants to like slide into the indent because it's the lowest point on the button. So that's my one frustration with this machine, is I wish I had a different button foot, but we still got it done. I hand crank at a fairly wide zigzag stitch and just go slowly back and forth. I did have to narrow this one a bit. It wasn't the full number 5 setting I usually have my buttons on. This is at like a 4.5. So just take the time, hand crank it. Otherwise you're gonna break a needle or a button. Did I say break? And it's terrifying every fucking time. So be patient. Give yourself the time to just do it this way, and then once you're sure it's going back and forth, also make sure your stitch length is at 0 so that the feed dogs on the bottom side aren't trying to shift the fabric anywhere, which will also shift the button around, and you don't want that because that's how shit breaks. And then I do a bunch of rows of stitching into the buttonholes. I do like 10 times back and forth, so like 20 total stitches. And then sometimes I do add fray check to the back side just to ensure that these aren't going anywhere. And then the skirt is done. I definitely think this is a little long for what I usually do, but I think it'll be nice having a full-on knee length, kind of slightly bigger size on me skirt for the winter so I can really bundle up with it. Because listen, it was -4, not including wind chill, when I got up this morning. So having kind of bulkier, warmer windshields like this skirt is gonna be is really gonna be nice. And then I can have, you know, really thick sweater type leggings and the shorts I always wear over them to keep them up, and also so I don't flash anybody, and however many layers of tops I have tucked into the waistband. Like, this is gonna give me that extra room, and this is why I'm not at all upset with it being a slight bit bigger. But yeah, I'm really happy with how the button placket came out. It's wonderful. The only thing that I want to do different on the next skirt is just make it shorter, which would also then need less buttons because there would be a shorter space to have to fill in with buttons, if that makes sense. But I'm really pumped about how this came out, and I'm looking forward to making even more. I'm getting the hang of this, both sewing and just, you know, existing as a person. I can already tell just in the couple projects I've done that I have improved on these couple of techniques. If you're wondering about the blue pleated skirt I did last week, I did go back and I hemmed everything up and then I repressed from both the underside and the front side, did all of it. I repleated the whole dang thing, and I am so happy I took the time to do it. I really pressed those pleats into place so it's hanging fucking marvelously. And I did hand sew the hem up, so you can't really see the stitches from the front side, because I did like a blind hem stitch where you just pick up like a single thread from the front side when you're attaching the bit that's folded up. Took a while, but absolutely worth it. And that is also in my closet now, and I'm in love with it. So thank you all for talking me into it. I know I was stubbornly trying to get out of it at the end of the last video. I was also feeling supremely terrible last time, where that is not the case this week. So I hope this was helpful to watch, or interesting, or entertaining perhaps. Bert's all snuggled up in the other room, so I'm sorry he's not making an appearance, but him and I would both like to thank everyone over on Patreon for giving me the opportunity to do this stuff. I know I'm repeating myself, but I wouldn't get to do this without y'all. I get to prioritize this in my week and come up with new ideas and take the time to hand sew a hem to get a better result, where that definitely wouldn't be happening if it weren't for y'all. So thank you so much. And to everyone that hangs out, I got a ton of great advice on the last couple of videos. If there's anything you want to throw out for this one, if you've worked with denim. Oh, also this definitely needs pockets, in case you're like, how are there not pockets on this? That's in the plan. Don't you worry. I just gotta decide how and where. They're probably gonna be like patch pockets on the front and maybe the back. Undecided. I need to look through some Instagram posts and find some inspiration. But this was a lot of fun, and I'm glad I took the time, especially with the other red skirt fresh in my mind, to give this type of thing another go. And the denim was great to work with. As long as I was thinking ahead and accounting for bulk and not fucking myself over with that, it was super nice to sew on. I'm less terrified of it now. Wouldn't you know it, things aren't as scary once you finally get into them. So there's that little nugget for you. This happens every time I'm terrified to do a thing, is it's fine. It's fine once I'm in it. Maybe a pain in the ass, but even if this hadn't turned out well, the denim didn't try to like murder me, so what's the worst that could happen? Break a couple needles? So what? Okay, before I get into a big rant about getting over fears of things, I'm gonna go, and I will see you back here with another video next Friday. Thank you so much for hanging out. Also, I fucked up, as I always do with this song. It is Streetlight Manifesto, not Catch-22. God damn it. That lyric and then the fuck it, thank you, I love you all are the ones I use the most, and I always switch which band. It's the same singer. We don't have to get into it, but I just, you know, they play a lot of the same songs, so I'm letting myself off the hook with this one. Bye.